Hey, this is Troy Baker, and you are listening to Medium Shift.
Warning! Warning! This podcast contains spoilers.
Listen at your own risk.
Welcome to Medium Shift, the podcast that investigates how stories stack up from medium to medium through the adaptation process.
In today's episode, we delve into the mind of Bruce Wayne, the Batman, the Telltale story.
The Telltale series.
Yeah.
Batman the Telltale series.
It didn't work with the thing. No.
It didn't. That's right. Welcome to Medium Shift. I'm Chris.
And I'm Ev.
And this episode, we're going to be delving into another video game, and excitingly, our first interactive narrative in Batman the Telltale series, released as 5 episodes over the course of, I think, about 6 or 7 months. It follows basically an interactive story where you play as Bruce Wayne, who, plot twist, is Batman, as he deals with, fairly early in his career, the emergence of some new and interesting villains in Gotham City, while still dealing with all the platonic and professional relationships in his life. So, Batman, the Telltale series, Telltale in general, how do you feel about this, Evan?
I know you're going to hate me for this.
Yes, I know. I'm already prepping all my comebacks.
I'm not a huge fan of Telltale. I think that's just me personally. I find would be a really good novel, story, interactive thing if it was, one, your choices mattered more. Because I feel that's where it kind of Telltale always seems to break me, is the illusion of choice. I don't think it quite hits the nail on the head with that. I'm totally fine with the idea of the illusion of choice. I know video games need to do that. I just feel Telltale doesn't quite get it. And it also plays up my anxiety way too much with its very, very fast-moving bar, where I have to make very quick decisions that I can't read very quick enough, and I'm just sort of throwing things out there. And
Just like real life.
in real life, I have a bit more agency to this, and I can pause for like 5 seconds and think about things, and I'm not going to start saying something where I think it's going to be one way, but it actually turns out to be something different. It's like those things where it's like, I like your shirt versus I'm going to punch you in the face. It's like, oh, I'm going to pick that I like your shirt. And it's like, oh, I like your shirt, you rat-faced punk. Like, no, that's not what I wanted. Don't do this to me. And then it just hurts my anxiety. So yes, that's my general opinion of Telltale games.
Right.
Also, like, at the end of episode 1, apparently 5 of my choices out of like the 30 I made actually matter in any way.
Well, that's the one that they give you percentages on. Like, more of your choices beyond that still have ramifications down the line, but
so many of them don't.
well, yeah, sure. So,
But it is nice being able to play Batman in a variety of different ways, whether it's the Dark Knight Batman, where he's all gruff and will kick the crap out of you, or the Dark Knight Returns, where he's even gruffer and will really beat the ever-loving hell out of you, or more like your animated Batman, who's got a dry sense of humor and kind of like this. Or you can play it how I played Batman, as Oliver Queen.
why am I not surprised? I should have seen that
He's
coming.
the better Batman.
It's so not true. It's so the other way around. The leftist Batman. Sure.
Justice Warrior for the win.
Oh, dear God. All right. Fine. In comparison, yeah, well, this is going to make for an interesting episode at least, because I love the Telltale games. I think they are wholly up my alley in so many respects. And then I think not only are they some of the best storytellers in video games, but I think their approach to storytelling, and yeah, certainly it is the illusion of choice, but the way that it kind of melds that kind of televisual episodic, like building on like serialized narrative design with interaction, I think is a really interesting in ways. Like, as I've kind of mentioned in previous ones, like I've done a little bit of work regarding like interactivity and things like that. And there's this notion of like closed and open interactivity, where like open interactivity basically allows the user to do whatever they want in like within certain circumstances. Whereas closed interactivity is kind of like working within a specific box. Like you can go in any direction you want to in that box, but it's still always going to be within the confines of what someone else has put out for you. And that obviously is the way that Telltale operates, because they can't, it's just functionally impossible to operate in a way where every single choice matters and leads to wildly different outcomes and things like that. But I think within that box, the storytelling that they construct, I think, is legitimately really good and really strong. And even when my choices don't matter, I think there's an interesting psychological implication that happens, that when you are playing as one of the characters, when you are making choices, you are so much more emotionally invested, not only emotionally, but physically invested in what is happening compared to a TV show or something like that. Like, I can watch a TV show with Batman, and he makes a certain choice, and I'm like, oh yeah, sure, Batman will probably do that. But when I am the one literally making that decision, it doesn't necessarily matter if my choice is going to have ramifications or not. It is going to emotionally invest me in the story that is being told in a way that would not happen in other mediums. So that's really where I think their strength comes from in relation to storytelling. And I think Batman the Telltale series is absolutely similar in that respect. So yeah, I think obviously I totally understand where you're coming from, is that a lot of people always desire more interaction, but
it isn't even that as much. It's also, you bring up getting invested in the story. I couldn't fully invest in the story because at any moment I was worried I was going to mispress a button and suddenly I'd get a game over.
Well, you don't get game overs for the most. Well, I mean, yeah, quick time events at the very least. So.
Yes.
Yeah.
So many quick time events. I just got a flat out game over because I wasn't fast enough, apparently.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's
and
one
also
of
the really annoying thing where apparently only half the time the left analog stick works, and the other half the time it's just the right, and that's how I miss a shot, and then suddenly I'm dead.
Oh, that sounds like a problem with your controller, quite frankly.
No, it was part of it's the one where anything you had to like get into a particular zone could only be done with the right stick.
Yeah, right.
Whereas everything else was fine with the left. And so I'm worried. Now I have multiple sticks to juggle at the same...
Sure. No, fair enough. I mean, there is an interesting discussion when it comes to interactive narratives, because obviously, you know...
Quick press X. Too late.
No, that's not... that's not what I'm talking about here. Yeah, so interactive narratives, it's interesting in a way that it is kind of a paradox, and that interactivity and narrative in both respects are seeking the same thing, complete control over what is occurring. Like, interaction desires full autonomy to do whatever you want in whatever context, whereas narrative prioritizes the author to have complete control over the events so that they can tell the coherent story that they want to. So the idea of an interactive narrative, in a way that you're kind of touching on there, quite frankly, is inherently a little bit of a contradiction, because it can feel like you are constructing your own narrative within these choices, but it's only within the confines of what Telltale wants you to do. And for a lot of people, that's frustrating. Like the things you talk about, that you don't have the worthwhile, you feel like your choices don't matter, and that the dialogue options are perfunctory and things like that. That is not an uncommon criticism of Telltale, and I can obviously understand where that is coming from, because it's just not the way that narrative and interaction frequently operates in like other games and other TV shows and things like that. But I think something about that middle ground I find personally really fascinating, and in a way that I think it really elevates a lot of their storytelling. Like, I don't think I liked the Telltale Batman series a decent amount, but I think their really best stuff can be found in stuff like The Walking Dead and Tales from the Borderlands, stuff where you, especially The Walking Dead, where you can feel so much more emotionally invested in the characters, which makes you feel like even if your choices don't necessarily matter, they feel more significant, because there's a level of emotional storytelling that Batman doesn't quite operate in. Batman is obviously much more of like a classic action film noir mystery kind of series, and that doesn't lend itself to emotive storytelling in the way that something like the Walking Dead series does.
I do admit, I've seen like the Walking Dead gameplay and stuff, and that does seem like you can take a bit more time with the choices, and it's a lot more story invested, and it's not just what kind of level of dick are you?
Yeah. There's a little bit of that as well, and there's less quick time events too, which is nice. But yeah, I think people who have not played a Telltale game before, I always recommend start with The Walking Dead, because I really think that is their strength. But that being said, I still think the Telltale Batman series is still really solid, and not only because I'm a big Batman fan. So
fair enough.
Cool.
I do think there were some bits that the Telltale series got better than a lot of games, and that's the idea of trying to piece together the detective side of things, actually looking at one being the detective, and two, Batman actually showing his detective side,
Yeah, sure.
as opposed to some other things that seem to rarely get. I think the closest we've gotten so far is the Arkham games, and even they sort of tend to focus more on the criminal punching rather than the detective side of the Batman.
There is definitely like mystery stuff in the Arkham games, but it can be quite handholdy in some respects. And I don't think I think the way that they use the mysteries in this game, where you have like nodes and things like that you need to connect together, is good. I don't think it's necessarily incredibly complicated, but I think you're right in that it is a step in the right direction in some respects. And it's one of those things that I'm kind of talking about in relation to interaction, that like layering that on the Batman mythos makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Because allowing you to have control over the mystery in the way that Batman typically would, I think, logically fits with the character. So yeah, no, fair. That's an interesting point. Interesting. Well, at the very least, now that we've largely got our thoughts on Telltale as a whole out of the way, though I'm sure I'm going to keep referring back to interactivity a lot, especially considering like there are divergent paths in this game and things like that based on your choices. We could probably start talking about its inspiration from the Batman mythos itself. Yeah. Like you've talked about it, you referenced it briefly before, but the Arkham games, like Batman has had a kind of an interesting relationship with video games in a lot of ways, and that a lot of superhero franchises hasn't adapted to video games particularly well in a lot of respects, with the original exception being Batman Arkham Asylum when that first came out. Like I love the Batman Arkham trilogy so much. 100% going to do an episode on them down the line. And this kind of came on the coattails of that in a way that it's once again letting you play as Batman, but this time you have control over the way, as you mentioned, you have control over the way the Batman is. Like you essentially get to choose what type of Batman you want to be, which is
and more
great.
than that, which type of Bruce Wayne you want to be.
That too. Yeah.
Which is a lot of these games, like the Arkham games, never touch on. They don't touch on the secret identity side of things. Yep. And when a game tries to do that, usually it's kind of terrible.
Yeah, just a little bit. So it's I think it's really interesting, especially in regards to this game. Like I think the one big ethos that they took going into adapting the Batman mythos into this interactive format was the fact that they wanted to kind of reinvent it in a way. A lot of the stuff in this first season is taking familiar elements and then making them operate in different ways and shifting around the mythos. It's kind of like a Batman remix in a way that a lot of the best Elseworld tales are, which I think is absolutely the right approach. But even on top of that as well, the depiction of Batman as a vigilante has had so many iterations across the years. As you were kind of touching on before, there's like the sly, dark humor of the animated Batman. There's also the Batman who will basically try to save anyone, regardless of whether they're the criminals or the victims. There's also the incredibly brutal Batman from Batman: The Dark Knight Returns. And this, what I think is so clever about this game, about the way it portrays Batman, is that it's all of those versions of Batman in one, because you get to dictate which version of Batman it is, which I think is super cool. Yeah. I think like some of the choices, especially in like the first episode that you were talking about, whether you decide to break someone's limb or like intimidate them and things like that, the way you actually operate as Batman kind of means that it's drawing from a bunch of different Batman sources at once, except you get to choose which source it's taking it from, which I think is great. And once again, one of those things that I think interactivity allows you to do in storytelling. So, yeah.
So that I do have to give it its props for. It is very good at being able to not try and force you to be a particular Batman.
Yeah, for sure. Yep. And even the fact that you get to play as much Bruce Wayne that you do in this season compared to Batman, because it is not so action oriented and it's more dialogue heavy, it obviously makes more sense to be playing as Bruce Wayne instead of punching people's face in all the time. So yeah, which I think really works.
And there's an interesting level of a sort of meta narrative, because you're meeting all these characters as their sort of alter egos and stuff. You meet Catwoman first as Catwoman, but then as Selena Kyle.
Yeah.
And you're trying to deal with the two of you both knowing your identity and where you go with that. Talk about Harvey Dent back when he was good Harvey Dent before he developed Two-Face, and then later on as Two-Face.
Yep.
Sort of that brings into the whole thing.
Yeah. No, it's as I was kind of touching on before, in many ways it's we've talked about this obviously in relation to a lot of other series and things like that, but where the creators are so clearly writing something, assuming that while keeping in mind the audience's expectations going into it. And what I think is really great, especially about this season, is how much it kind of remixes and plays on establish like Batman pieces of lore and things like that. Like you make a great example of when like Two-Face shows up originally. Like you know generally where you think this character is going to go, which means you're going to approach it in a certain way in comparison to if you didn't know. And there's a lot of the way that it toys with those expectations and the knowledge of the fan base, I think, in really interesting and clever ways. The best example being obviously the big twist of the season, the fact that the main antagonist is Vicky Vale, which is nuts.
Yeah,
Because Vicky,
absolutely.
do you know much about Vicky Vale before you came into this game, or?
Basically, I've just seen her as one of the potential love interests for Batman, and also just a reporter.
Yep.
So, like, seen her from the Burton movies and from the Arkham games. She's just there.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then surprise,
Yeah,
Lady Arkham.
see, that's what I think is so genius about it. Because, I mean, Vicky Vale has been like a staple of the Batman mythos for a long time. Not only, as you said, as a love interest, but as a reporter. And so to suddenly reveal, hey, she's actually not only the main antagonist, but this big bad supervillain that is also this character that you're also super familiar with as well, I think is a really great twist. Because that is something that, especially me as a Batman fan, never anticipated. I never thought, because I just had so many expectations going into the game about who Vicky Vale was and how that was going to work out. So I think it's really cool. Yeah, and I think there's a lot of that stuff in this game, especially even regarding Penguin as well.
Yep.
So I mean, obviously Penguin is a similar antagonist, but Penguin is introduced early in episode 1 of season 1 as a much younger and sort of like sly, youthful version of the character, which is obviously incredibly different from the Penguin we know from.
My first thought when playing the game was immediately, I can fix him. I can stop him being the Penguin. No. No, can't.
No. Just wait until you get to season 2, though. But that's a whole other thing. So once again, it's one of those things that Penguin is so different from what you would anticipate going into a Batman game. That it immediately kind of breaks your expectations for it, because the Penguin we classically know is like the old fat guy in a business suit with a lot of trick umbrellas and things like that, and so.
And this was more Manchester Black, but without the psychic powers.
Yeah, Manchester Black is actually a really good analogy, honestly. Like, he's a more suave, like, kind of business opposition to Bruce Wayne, which I think is, really clever. And once again, one of those things, once you go outside of the expectations that a Batman fan would have leading into this, then, everything becomes fair game again. Because it's like, this is obviously a bit of a tangent, but, Batman Arkham Knight, regarding the main antagonist of that game is the Arkham Knight.
Yes.
And the whole twist is that it is Red Hood.
Jason Todd, as everyone predicted.
Yeah, exactly. Like, one of my main problems with the narrative in that game was that anyone who knows anything about Batman lore will immediately be able to pick up that that is Jason Todd. And they not only managed to avoid that in this game by like changing things just enough for it to be fresh and interesting, but also actively subverting expectations, which I think is great, and I think it really succeeded in doing so.
So while I do have go, especially in the beginning, about Telltale gameplay-wise, their narrative is quite very interesting. I'm very keen to see how that travels. And also, quite good on the voice acting.
Yeah, for the most part.
I mean, for the central sort of character. I think Troy Baker does a great job as Bruce Wayne.
To be honest, I don't know if I was ever sold on Troy Baker, in all honesty. I think you're right. I think he makes a better Bruce Wayne than he does Batman, but... Yeah, it took me about maybe 4 or 5 episodes for me to really get used to him in the role. So, yeah.
Well, it is a role that's generally sort of been given to Kevin Conroy, and if it's not Kevin Conroy, you sort of
you're already on the back foot.
You're on the back foot, and I think Troy Baker for this in the subversion of the expectations, I feel he played Batman differently than I was expecting. I figured that was probably a good thing in terms of the story.
Yeah, no, I can definitely see that. But you're absolutely right. It is one of those things that there's been so many really strong voices for Batman, with the definitive one being Kevin Conroy, that, I don't know. It came up a little bit short and a little bit flat on a few instances, but for the most part, I do think he was good. I do think all of the supporting cast is excellent, though. So I think his constant rapport with Selena Kyle is fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Harvey Dent felt a little bit brutal. Like, that version of the character, I find it really funny, especially in the first episode, when you see the two of them standing on stage together. If someone pointed out the two of those and said, which one of those is Batman?
Oh, Harvey Dent.
Harvey Dent! He's really buff!
He's taller!
Yeah, he's incredibly bulky, which is a weird version of Harvey Dent, sure. I think it worked for the most part. I think it was really smart. once again, like, since there's a focus in this game on like interpersonal relationships and balancing between so many different characters, making Harvey Dent at that point being a competitor for Hamilton Hill for the mayoral campaign, I think was a really smart addition, because it heightens the Bruce Wayne aspects more and his friendship with Harvey Dent and things like that. So, side note with Harvey Dent, one of the other things regarding interactivity is that in the end of episode 3, you can essentially stop him from becoming Two-Face. Like, he still has the split in personality, but you save half of his face from being scarred, which is great. Like, I mean, for the rest of the game, even in the end when he's rampaging through the mansion, he's doing it with like a full face. I'm like, this is weird, but I kind of like it. Once
I do
again,
have to ask in regards to Harvey Dent. Can we trust him?
God damn it.
Sorry, I have been there once. Continue.
Yeah. I mean, once again, it is one of those things, like, the moment you know that it's Harvey Dent, you know where that's going. But I think they still do a good enough job that it's still a compelling enough story along the way. So the probably the one story detail that bothered me the most is that is the detail regarding that Thomas Wayne was involved with the Falcones.
Okay, I thought that was quite interesting. As
as like kind of a corrupt businessman and things like that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I'm a little bit mixed on it, because it does the classic thing that always annoys me in Batman stories of making Joe Chill more significant than a mugger.
Yeah.
Like, it turns Joe Chill into a hit in a similar way that
I'm not such a fan of.
Yeah, exactly. I think the origin has always worked better when Joe Chill is like not even named, when he's just a random mugger that represents the desolate soul of Gotham City, as opposed to being something like plot based. That's what something really bothered me about the Gotham TV series as well. So yeah, I that frustrated me a little bit. I do think it's interesting to change that bit up of the mythos, because I think it adds a lot of moral ambiguity when you realize that, oh, my father was actually a really corrupt businessman who threw all of these people into Arkham for his own ends. But yeah, I don't know.
I will admit, I did see a lot of going into it. I thought this was just some sort of really clever conspiracy, and that's when I was really into it, because I'm like, oh, I'm still not entirely sure if this is actually what's fully going on. And by the end, when it was straight confirmed, and it was, I went a little off it.
Yeah, sure.
I'm like, this is right. But I felt that was a nice sort of conspiracy twist that sort of added to the mystery of things.
Point of intrigue, basically.
Yeah, point of intrigue.
Sure.
Didn't finish right, but at the start, I thought it was quite captivating.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I mean, it is good for like the mystery genre, which obviously Batman draws from a lot, and film noir and things like that.
Very noir.
Yeah, absolutely. And it does make for a lot of really interesting connections with Carmine Falcone and Hamilton Hill and all that as well, which I thought was, especially that scene in episode 1 with Falcone in like the room with the pool and the billiards and everything like that. I thought it was really great. So yeah, once again, I think this series really succeeds in a lot of like the dialogue and the relationships and things like that. Did you have any technical problems with the game as well, or?
Not a huge amount. There were a couple of times where Batman was suddenly just all in white.
Oh yeah, sure.
Is that what you mean by technical?
The white knight. Well, yeah, I'd say that's a technical problem. Yeah.
And I mean, there's my own ineptitude in which part technical glitch, part my own ineptitude, but some of the quick time events just did not work. I'm just like, I'm pressing the button. You're not doing anything. Oh, great, now I've blown up.
Yeah, sure. No, fair enough. I mean, the quick time events have always been the weakest part of the Telltale series in some respects. The real intrigue comes from the storytelling and the dialogue choices. But I mean, with Batman, especially being such an action-driven like franchise, you kind of need them in there, which is a bit of a difficult thing, I guess, unfortunately.
And I think that's where it lost me most, because it sort of took me out of the story for any time there's a quick time event.
Yeah, sure.
And so, which meant basically any time Batman was on the screen. I'm just like, okay, I'm trying to work out. And am I playing this game, or is the game just playing itself and I'm just here?
Or is the game playing me? Yeah, no, it's as I was kind of talking about earlier, that's why I think The Walking Dead works a little bit better, is that it still has those quick time events, but it doesn't feel quite as dependent as the as the Batman series does. So yep. Is there anything else you want to talk about regarding the story? Like, we can go into like some of the key choices if you want to, but it's not particularly significant.
No, especially because none of the choices super felt significant.
I mean, I think there's definitely some
aside from
ramifications.
key ones, but some of those just felt like the same thing happens no matter what I try.
Yeah, superfluous in some respects. Yeah. Once again, going back to that idea of like closed interactivity and things like that too. So, yeah.
There was one question. Harvey Dent, can we trust him?
Stop. Stop. God damn it. It's funny the first time. Now it's annoying.
Yeah, I know. That's what makes it fun.
Yes, I know. Fine. Yes, we can't trust him. No,
we're past that.
Yeah, we're well past that at this point. I'm trying to think if there's anything else significant worth talking about. I mean, I could always go into a little bit further details regarding how it kind of folds back in on itself in certain respects. As you're talking, like how some of the choices feel superfluous. It's kind of like the narrative goes forward and then branches out into two separate paths before coming back in together, which is kind of how I'm talking about. Like, it always stays within that one box, obviously. I don't know. I think there's enough variety. Like, because one of the things I enjoy most about the Telltale series is, like, playing through it with a friend at the same time or something and then comparing our choices and seeing how things change up to each time, which I think is fun. But, yeah, once again, I think if the storytelling wasn't already so strong in Telltale, like, the interaction and the choices, like, wouldn't be enough to compel it through. Like, ultimately, what I play it for is the storytelling, and I think they do a really good job, as we've kind of been touching on, how they handle the Batman mythos and remix it for people who are fans of the franchise and things like that, which I think is great.
I do want to briefly get your opinion on the art style. It's very classic Telltale, graphics-wise. What do you think? Do you think that works for a Batman?
I think it is visually interesting in some respects. I think the cinematography is quite nice in some, and it's funny to even say that in the game, but I mean, obviously the way that it's being framed, you don't have control over the camera. There's a lot of really lovely shots in there. I think having a comic book aesthetic, I mean, obviously it works with Batman. Batman has definitely seen it before. It feels a little bit flat sometimes.
That's where I was feeling.
Yeah,
for a lot of this.
but I mean, that's less of a problem with this game and more just with the Telltale engine in general. They did update the engine to some respect for this game, but it's still, you can tell it's still chugging along a little bit. It didn't really improve in that respect until The Walking Dead Season 4, where they went onto almost basically a completely new engine. That last season looks really good. And then Telltale shut down, so didn't even matter in the end.
Great.
Yeah, not fun. Yeah, I think for the most part, I think it is visually quite strong outside of the more technical, like, glitchy issues and things like that. Because especially the first time, because I played it episode by episode as it came out, which I don't believe you did.
No.
Yeah, so every episode as they kind of came out, there was always a few glitches and bugs and things like that where it would slow down and such. But I think since then they've patched a lot of it out. So, no, interesting. Ultimately, I think if you're a Batman fan, you're probably going to get enough out of this series. And if you're a Telltale fan, you'll still definitely enjoy it because it's very much more of the same in relation to them. If you're not a huge fan of interactive storytelling or like video games in general, like similar to the perspective that you're coming from, maybe worth avoiding. But I think there's enough there, especially if you're a big Batman fan, that you'll be able to get a lot out of this. And even if you ignore the fact that it's interactive and that your choices aren't incredibly significant and things like that, the fact that this is just a really strong Elseworld version of Batman, I think is compelling enough. So, cool. Is there anything else you want to touch on regarding the sources, or shall we move into do it differently?
Well, we didn't actually talk much about the sources because it is sort of adapted from everywhere.
Yeah. It's kind of similar to the Dark Knight where it draws universally from the Batman mythos. So, yeah.
So, no real comic actually that I could at least going through the story that I could actually sort of link it to. Yeah. Really.
The closest thing I could think of was a scene in The Long Halloween when Thomas Wayne saves one of the Falcone men because he's a doctor basically, and they come to the his house late at night because they don't want it to be in the papers or anything like that. And he basically has to make a choice between, do I want to save this mobster or let him die? But that's kind of the closest thing I could find to like moral corruption in the Waynes, because that's a completely new idea for this game. So yeah, as we've kind of been saying going along, it takes the general idea of the Batman mythos and the characters and all that, and then just twists characters in some ways a little way, because Catwoman is quite accurate.
Yes.
But then like someone like Penguin is very different. So yeah. No, I think you're right that there's no key sources, but there's still, it's more taken from the zeitgeist. Yeah. The Batman zeitgeist. Cool. Shall we move into do it differently then?
Sure. Jingle, jingle, jingle. Batman.
Batman? Okay, sure. Why not? Shall I go first this week? Or?
Sure.
Okay. I mean, so for this one, like, I still enjoy this series enough as is. What I would really want to do is keep the same storytelling like approaches. Like, a lot of the character changes I think are really great and things like that. What I would want to do is like kind of remix it from not only an engine but a gameplay perspective.
Yeah.
So I would love to see this in something a little bit more powerful than the Telltale engine. In something like, I mean, I'm not an expert on like video game engines, but like Unity or Unreal Engine 4 with like much more closer graphics. So kind of imagine something a mix between of like the Batman Arkham games, the way those games look and the way Rocksteady has developed them, but very much within the Telltale storytelling interactive narrative framework. And I think that would have been a really great way of not only making the game look more impressive, but probably improving the visual fidelity in a lot of respects. I think it probably would have made the QuickTime events more interesting if the action itself was more visually exciting, because it was just high fidelity, while still maintaining what I think is the strengths of the game, which is the storytelling and some of the choices and the changes that they made to some characters.
Yeah, my do definitely is very similar to that, because as you can probably tell, my issues were with the gameplay mainly, and lack of time. It just gets my anxiety so hard.
Yeah, no, fair.
I'm having nightmares about that little arrow coming down.
Just getting ready to crush you, basically.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, sure. I mean, they need to keep the conversation moving. There's a really interesting kind of... Once again, this is another research tangent, I guess, but there's a really interesting discussion how they balance interactively continuing at the same time of narrative. So, like, narrative can be occurring at the same time you're making choices, whereas normally they, like, cut between the two. But, anyway, that's a whole other thing.
So, mine, very similar. Work with something more like the Arkham engine, and I reckon, break open that narrative box that you say in the closed narrative just a bit up. Still keep it closed.
It can't be entirely open, obviously. Unfortunately.
But sort of more of a sort of halfway point between the openness of Arkham and the closed narrative of Batman. Maybe have everything very localized, but still being able to control things inside. So the choices rely instead less on like one or two heat of the moment things, but like maybe where you go to first, or where you sort of what objects you interact with first. Have that flow going, everything operating behind you, sort of like things continuing, and the branches actually come less from dialogue and more from action, I'd say, especially with the Batman side of things.
Sure.
Also lose the QuickTime events. I actually have that, try and develop some sort of basic control scheme, I guess.
Yeah, okay. Would you want to would you kind of like want to integrate the action and the combat from like the free flow style combat from the Arkham games into it a little bit?
A little bit. I'd sort of more the being able to in the heat of the moment choose if you're gonna like batarang, or if you're gonna smoke bomb, or if you're gonna just punch him in the face.
Sure, okay.
Sort of that kind of thing, and almost like a sort of 2D fighting game in that sense, where you're sort of just trying to work out good combos to try and deflect. Kind of like the Injustice games, I'd say.
Yeah, sure, I could see that. Makes sense.
And use that as sort of the way that the main choices happen. Keep all the dialogue stuff for the Bruce Wayne section. I think that is good. Maybe give it a little bit more time, just for my own sanity.
Sure.
But yeah, I would definitely, with the Batman side of things, change that up.
No, fair enough. Yep, I think it speaks to what we ultimately think the strengths and the weaknesses of this game is, and just the Telltale formula in general in some respects. But I think something along those lines, like a middle ground between the open like action of the Arkham series and the storytelling dialogue driven stuff of Telltale.
Yep.
I think that'd be like a perfect combination of the two. So maybe one day, I mean, Telltale's not going to be making anything again anytime soon, unfortunately. But who knows? I mean, Rocksteady's been working on something for 4 years without anyone telling us.
Yep. There is actually one interesting aside to do it differently. Do you think this would work with any other DC superhero?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I could totally see like I know you would love a Green Arrow game or something like that, but I mean the story-driven like dialogue choice thing, I feel like you could see with almost any sort of superhero basically, as well as like a little bit of emerging with action and things like that. Like I think it'd be really interesting to see something along the lines of like, I don't know, a Superman game or something.
That was my thoughts, because I feel it works a lot better with choice-wise, because that's the problem with the Superman games we've always had. You're dealing with this god, basically, as your character, who's possible. How do you make that compelling when he basically can't be killed?
Yeah.
And I think the best way to do that is make it his choices and the themes. And that's what Superman its strength has always been in talking about themes and the ideas of hope and dealing with Superman as a person trying to sort of fix the world.
Yeah.
So I really think, just another do it differently to make it a Superman game.
Sure. That would actually be... I would love to see a Telltale Superman game, thinking about that now. You're right, absolutely. Like, the action is just not quite as compelling in the way that Batman action is in so many respects, because it's just big people punching each other for the most part.
Yeah.
But the ideas and the themes of, like, what kind of person does Clark Kent want to be, and what does Superman mean to so many different people would be really interesting. Yeah, awesome. Damn it, now I want a good Superman game. Guess I'll just have to go and play Superman 64 again. All right, shall we move into recommendations then?
Sure, let's do that.
Yep. I have a Batman-related recommendation, actually.
Okay.
Yep. It's a recent film, or recent at the point of recording. It's probably going to be out for a while by the time this episode goes out. But I would like to recommend to people the animated DC movie Batman and TMNT. Because it is surprisingly good. Yeah.
And again, with the Troy Baker-led Batman.
Yeah, there you go. So I think he's really good in the film as well. But I mean, see, what really... This is kind of like one of those kitchen sink approaches, is that the moment you think of a crossover in your head, and like, you know, Batman meeting the TMNT and what all the potential of that could be, this is basically what this film is. Like, it's just throwing every single like fun idea of crossing over between the TMNT and Batman universe onto a wall and see what sticks. And it's really fun. It has some really great action. The dynamics between a lot of the characters is delightfully entertaining. Like, all of the writing and the voice acting is top notch. I think it's just a really, really good time, and it was so much better of a crossover than I expected. So yeah, I think for anyone who enjoys Batman or TMNT, it's well worth having a look.
Yeah, it's interesting. I haven't seen the film, but I have read the comics of Batman vs TMNT and the wider Batman meets type of series, and they do some really interesting stuff out there, and it's great for character analyses and these types of things, because you're looking at characters who would not interact in any other sort of situation and seeing how they handle each other. I find it really interesting. And on top of that, the stuff they've done with Mortal Kombat and the interactions they've had with Batman and Sub-Zero.
Oh yeah, sure. Wasn't there a like Mortal Kombat versus DC Universe game prior? Yeah, okay, sure.
So it's been done, and there have been comics as well of that as well.
Yeah, sure.
So yeah, it's always quite interesting, sort of looking into that. Hell, they've even had Batman and the Power Rangers.
Yeah, that's true. They've had Batman with almost everything these days. Batman's fought a Predator, Batman's fought an Alien. Pretty sure Batman's fought a Terminator 2.
Yep,
Yeah.
and Elmer Fudd.
I really want to read that comic, actually, though. I've heard it's really good. The Bugs Bunny crossover, or the Looney Tunes crossovers. Yeah, one day I'll get around to it. I would
Also
love
the Hanna-Barbera ones.
Oh, yes.
Also get into those.
Yeah, sure.
They are fantastic.
A lot of fun crossovers out there. We should do one for a future episode, actually. Batman vs. TMNT would be fun to do, too. One day. I mean, the DC Universe movies, there's so many of them that would be fun, but yeah, maybe sometime down the line. All right, what have you got for us this episode, then?
Well, mine is, you can kind of link it to Batman in the fact that it's about vampires.
Oh.
And Batman is basically just the idea of a vampire.
I mean, he does become a vampire in a couple of comics.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So yeah, the weird kids show, My Babysitter's a Vampire.
Oh.
It's
Never heard of it.
It's a teen tween sort of thing. It was a movie originally that became a TV show, and it's a great addition to my favorite returning segment. Why does everything I love die?
Aww. Why does everything I love die?
Yeah. But yeah. So yes, it is. It was unfortunately cancelled after 2 seasons on a major cliffhanger. So I'm still very upset about that. But it was interesting. The movie originally was sort of like a fun little parody homage to those like Twilight movies and those kinds of like Vampire Diaries type things where it's all vampires are being all very sexy.
Yeah, sure.
And it's just like, okay, let's throw 2 nerds in there and their babysitter turns out to be a vampire and let's see what happens. Okay. And it becomes this weird sort of magical high school thing. And
is it animated or live action?
Live action.
Okay, right.
And it's Canadian, so it gets away with a lot of stuff
that
they don't normally do. Like, at one point, they make a joke about Heidi Montag.
Hiding what?
Heidi Montag being mainly plastic. She's a reality star turned actress.
Never heard of her.
Yeah. But it's a weird thing. Weird mentions and offshoots and weirdly cross between adult and childlike TV show. The thing that Canada seems to just revel in those types of teen shows, because they have so much weird and interesting stuff out there from Canada. Canada's a weird place.
Canada.
I love it. I love it so much.
Canada is also a delightful place.
Oh yeah, in the best possible way. It's weird because it's different to what you normally get from American. But yeah, it's something I like. But that's just generally the kind of things I like. So you might like it, you might not. It's very teen. So if you're not into that kind of thing, ignore it. But if you're like me and you like that kind of stuff, I'd say give it a go.
Sure, fair enough. I mean, I've never heard of it, but I mean, I also try to stay away from vampire media for the most part.
Fair enough.
Unless Batman is involved. There was a Batman versus Dracula movie back in the day. It's actually pretty good. I didn't mind it. Yeah, Joker got turned into a vampire and then broke into a blood bank. And there's this really great line or something. It's like, there's been a break-in at the bank. And Batman's like, no, it doesn't matter. I don't have time for this. I need to find Joker. And then Alfred turns around and says, but sir, it's a blood bank. And the music goes... It's great. Yeah. Sure, what's that film? It's been a while since I've seen it. Well, thank you to everyone who listened to this episode of Medium Shift. Next episode, we're going to be continuing with Batman the Telltale series with season 2 called...
Wait, or was that my cue
Yes,
to...
that's your cue. Well,
I didn't know what you were going to do with that because you just came out with what we were doing.
Well, yeah, I know, because I couldn't think of a way of teasing it because I'd already admitted to the fact that the next thing we were doing was Batman... Anyway.
The Enemy Within.
Yeah, Batman the Enemy Within. Season 2 should be really fun. Going to be a lot more Joker talk next episode, which I'm sure people enjoy, so...
Make sure you subscribe, rate with us. We haven't said that in a while, have we?
Oh, yeah.
Keep forgetting.
Yep, subscribe and whatever.
Promote us for us, because we can't do it.
Yeah, sure. Feel free to rate us on iTunes and whatever other platforms we're on at this point. So, and send in recommendations or just
Email us.
about whatever else you want to tell us about your day.
I need a friend.
Yeah, sure. You want to tell us about your day, we'll happily chat about that in whatever context. Until next time, fare thee well.
Harvey Dent. Can we trust him?
Shut up!